So in my last video, I talked about how we could use numerology to try and predict the next once-in-a-lifetime event. And as I was doing that, I realized there's a huge parallel between our current timeline and another timeline 50 years ago. And I put them side by side for comparison. So on November 22nd, 1963, if you were alive that day, you probably remember where you were. That was when JFK was assassinated. In my lifetime, the biggest equivalent to that was probably September 11th, 2001, obviously. And then a few years after both of those events, we had major space disasters. We had Apollo 1 on January 27th of 1967. And then we had Columbia on February 1st, 2003. And then a few years after both of those events, we had major financial crises. On August 15, 1971, Nixon ended the gold standard and he froze prices for 6 months. And in my lifetime, the biggest equivalent of that was probably on September 15, 2008, when the Lehman Brothers failed. And that was followed by more crises. In 73, the Yom Kippur War and the oil shocks, right? Oil quadrupled in price. On August 3rd, 2011, President Obama was saying that he couldn't guarantee his Social Security checks would go out, and that caused a huge upset in the market, and our bonds got downgraded from AAA to AA. And then 6 years after that, there were some international crises of hostages. We had the Iran hostages in 79, and this time around it was in North Korea. We had a college student named Otto Warmbier who was held hostage in North Korea for 2 years, and he ultimately died of his injuries there. And then both of those international crises were followed by pandemics. In 81 we had AIDS, and in 2020 we had COVID-19. And during the times of those pandemics, we had major insurrections and assassination attempts. Reagan was shot on March 30, 1981, and then we had January 6, obviously. And then both of those were followed by interest rate hikes. So I see a lot of parallels in the last 20 or so years as we saw in the 60s and 70s and early 80s. I just find this is such a interesting coincidence, to say the least.